Hey there, everyone. Mychal Bryan here from the Oraculos School of Astrology with yet another question and answer segment where practicing astrologers bring me their questions and I provide them answers based on my astrological practice. If you're enjoying these Q&A segments and you'd like to work with either myself or an OSA certified astrologer, then by all means check out our website where you can book yourself a high-quality astrological consultation today. Also, I answer many of these questions and more in my book, Mastering Traditional Astrology, A Depth of Beginning in the Celestial Art, which you can buy a copy of on Amazon.com. And if you'd like to become a professional astrologer, then check out our Professional Astrologers Diploma Program, as well as our Medical Astrologers Diploma Program by visiting the education page of our website.
So when you're looking at love in someone's chart, and then when you look at the breakdown of the different representations of the seventh house, Lord 7, and then Venus, if you're gonna explain to, say, a client what each of those places are representing in your chart, how would you do so?
So the question has to do with the topic of love specifically within the natal chart and how we break that down and how we interpret that topic for our clients. Within traditional astrology, particularly traditional astrology that is house-based, the seventh house is the only house that represents our love life within this lifetime, period. We go to the seventh house for everything having to do with love, romance, intimacy, who we're going to love, what our normal understanding of love is in this lifetime, what our regular experience of love is like in this lifetime, and everything that we can possibly want to know about love and our love promise within this lifetime is coming from our seventh house. The seventh house itself is going to represent our general experience of love. So if you have a planet within your seventh house, that planet in your seventh house is going to represent your general experience of love and being in relationships in general. The ruler of the seventh house is going to represent your specific partner within this lifetime. Now, this brings up a very interesting question because the question is, well, what if I have 1,000 partners? Hopefully not. But what if I have, let's bring that down. What if I have 500 partners, which is a far more reasonable number of partners to have than 1,000. So what if I have 500 partners in this lifetime? Who is my seventh house going to describe? In general, the seventh house and the ruler of the seventh house is going to give us information about the most defining love relationship of our lives. So go back to 1,000 partners. If you do have 1,000 partners, chances are within that sea of 1,000 partners, there is probably going to be one or several that are extraordinarily defining within your lifetime. And chances are those partners that you have are going to all be in conformity with the ruler of your seventh house and the story of the ruler of your seventh house. Now, as many people know, I hold this philosophy, which may not necessarily be a general astrology philosophy, but it's a Mychal Bryan philosophy, which means it's an Oraculos philosophy. And that philosophy is that we've already experienced one complete cycle of our natal promise by the time we are 30 years old. Which means if your natal chart says a particular story about you, chances are you're going to experience the full gamut of that story by the time as you are 30 years old, and then you begin another cycle of that story afterwards. Now, what about the people who've experienced domestic violence within a relationship that they didn't enter until they were 45 years old? That's a great question. However, I would contend that that person already experienced some semblance of that type of love story even before they were 45 years old and definitely before they were 30 years old, because usually the things that occur within our natal chart, they occur cyclically. So if it wasn't a physical violent occurrence, it could have been violence in some other way, an emotional violent occurrence, or a mental violent occurrence, or something else that left you feeling unsafe. However, the overarching theme is I feel unsafe within intimate relationships. And even if the person who you dated at 25 years old just shouted at you the wrong way, whereas the person you dated at 45 years old pushed you down a staircase. The point is, both of those things reinforce this singular concept or this singular idea of I feel unsafe within relationships. So I do believe that we experience the fullness of our natal promise by the time as we're 30 years old, and then we begin another cycle after 30 moving forward, which for all intents and purposes, we repeat by the time we're 60 years old, and then we repeat it one more time by the time as we're 90 years old, and if you're lucky, you'll repeat your natal promise yet again by the time as you're 120 years old. Because the reason why our lives feel familiar throughout the entirety of our lives is because we're often just repeating the same natal promise again and again. So that's one. In terms of, suppose a person has several partners, the ruler of the seventh house is more than likely going to represent the specific partner that you have within this lifetime and the specific story that you have surrounding your primary marriage partner within this lifetime. I was giving a reading to a lady the other day. She was married for all of 2 months. However, the ruler of her seventh house and the aspects that the ruler of her seventh house was receiving were completely descriptive of the sort of partner that she had. She had the ruler of her seventh house as Venus in the third house, opposite Uranus. In the eighth house, the degree is kept it in the eighth house, not the ninth house. And I said to her that chances are her partner was a very ingenious person who might have been working in science or higher education, or he was working in a technological field vis-a-vis the Uranus opposite him in his own ninth house, or he could have been someone who was very high strung as a result of the high tech work that he's doing. And she confirmed afterwards that yes, he was an engineer and he was working within the technological industry. So that's one of the ways how we see the ruler of the seventh house being descriptive of the partner. However, they were only married for 2 months. And subsequent to that marriage, every other relationship she had been in was a relationship that ended because of deception or that ended because that person was having some vastly different life outside of the context of their relationship. And it was a very stressful situation in general, this concept of love. Yet, for all of the relationships she's been in, the story that was told within her natal chart was the story of the man who she was married to for only 2 months. I believe that the ruler of the seventh house has a fundamental commitment to representing the person who we marry in this lifetime. Even if we divorce and marry again, more often than not, the ruler of the seventh house is going to give us some fundamental statement about our first marriage, and we could choose to do it differently the second time around. And the reason for this is because our natal chart shows us the standout events that really define the shape of our lives. And very often the first marriage a person has is very defining because it's the first. And so I believe that our natal chart has the ability to show us our firsts, our first home, our first relationship, our first marriage, our first job. What is the thing that we gravitate towards first? Because very often the things that we find ourselves gravitating towards subsequent to that are also going to be descriptive of that first and that primary experience. Now, Venus is another planet that is having something to do with the seventh house. I often tell people that if they have a planet that is in any sort of aspect at all with the ruler of their seventh house, they can interpret that as that planet being in that same sort of aspect with their Venus. So if a person has the ruler of their seventh house in opposition with Saturn, you could interpret that as a Venus-Saturn contact, which would have to do with separation in love. If a person has the ruler of their seventh house in opposition with Neptune, you could interpret that as a Venus-Neptune contact, which would be disappointment in love. If a person has the ruler of their seventh house in a wonderful trine relationship with that same Neptune, you could interpret that as a person who sees their lover through rose-colored glasses, and their lover is probably the source of the light within their lives because they view that person as being the best thing since sliced bread. And we can do this through all of the planets. The ruler of the seventh house in opposition to Mars, that person is probably having a partner who's a very martial person, or who's a person who's always on the defensive, or a person who is very argumentative and just contentious to be around in general. So Venus aspects carry that same signification, but if you have the ruler of the seventh house receiving any aspects, you can interpret that as being any sort of aspect to Venus. Because if a planet is in the seventh house, that's similar to having that planet in aspect to Venus. If a planet is conjunct the seventh house cusp, that's similar to having that planet in a conjunction with Venus. And if a planet is in any aspect at all to the ruler of the seventh house, that's similar to having those same planets having those aspect relationships to Venus, because in all things, Venus is representative of our fundamental relationship to love within this lifetime, as are both the seventh house as well as the ruler of the seventh house.
Thank you.
You're very welcome.
I've just had this a few times actually in clients that I've seen. So, what are some things that you would consider when you delineate the native's parents being in the seventh house? Like one or both of them?
So the question is, how would I interpret a native's parents being in the seventh house? If you have the native's parents in the seventh house, that can be an indication that the native's partner reminds them of their parents. Now, this is something that I think is more common than not, because many people marry people who either joyfully or frustratingly remind them of their parents. But when you have either one or both of your parents in your seventh house, that can indicate that your parents and their decision-making process is greatly impacting your love life. But it can also represent that your partner and the personality and the characteristics of your partner are greatly in conformity with the personality and the characteristics of your parents. And I dare say, whichever parent we have closer to the cusp of the seventh is going to be the parent that your partner reminds you of the most. Now, conversely, the 10th house of the chart is the house of your mother. However, it is the derived 4th house of your partner, which makes it your partner's 4th house. So that can also be an indication that not only does your partner remind you of your mother, but it can also indicate that your partner is very much like their own father. So perhaps there's a deep similarity between your mother and that person's father, and that person is bringing out the characteristics of those people within themselves. Similarly, the 4th house of the radical chart is the derived 10th house of the partner. So that can indicate not only does your partner remind you of your father, but it could also indicate that your partner is reminding you of their own mother. And that's because the 4th house of the chart is the 10th house of the partner, and that could indicate that that person is both reminding you of your father as well as their mother, and that those two people, your father and your partner's mother, are sharing some similarities that are being made manifest through the characteristics of your partner. Do you know that you can now get daily astrological updates by following us on TikTok and Instagram? Follow us at Oraculos Astrology on both TikTok and Instagram to keep your finger on the pulse of the astrology of the day every day.